everyone, and welcome to Ironside's Take30 series on a modern analytics framework. This is week 4, and we'll be talking through knowledge workers and a bit about governance. My name is Jeff Spear, I run the information management practice at Ironside, and we'll also talk a little bit about Ironside itself. We'll give a quick summary of the modern analytics framework for people who may have missed some of the earlier sessions. And then we'll take Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the questions window, and we'll get to them at the end. Here at Onsite, we exist to help you make better decisions about your business using your data. We've been doing that for over 2 decades, and we do that with a variety of capabilities, starting with strategic or advisory, where we can sort of look at your overall analytics state now and where you want to be, and figure out a roadmap to get you there. We also do a lot of design work, whether that's UX or design sprints or data modeling solution architecture to set up the right analytic structures for you. And then we build and deploy dashboards, reports, data warehouses, data lakes, cloud migrations. We do a lot of governance work, including master data management, overall governance organizations, and sort of particular targeted solutions, which we'll be talking about today. And then we also do managed services, where we can host some of your tools, we can manage them, we can administer them to help you focus on your analytics themselves. So today's talk is sort of in the advise, design, and pretty heavily in the govern side of things. Like I said, this is a 6-week series. Week 1 was sort of introducing the overall concept of the modern analytics framework. We've talked about the why and the what. Today we're talking about the who, the knowledge worker population, and then we're talking about governance, because managing and coordinating those people is crucially important. Next week, we'll be talking about how to optimize your methodology for creating new insights and analytics. And then week 6 will be a summary, and we'll bring it back all together. So for those, or as a reminder, for those who didn't see the week 1 broadcast, the modern analytics framework really has 3 layers. And the top layer here is insight generation. So you have people who are generating insights that create value within your organization, and they pretty much all follow a process where they bring data in from somewhere, they transform it, they create calculations, they integrate it, they do work on that data to generate insight, and that insight will have some degree of value. And depending on how valuable it is, you want to deploy that in a way that gets that value out to the right people, and in a way that lets the people who generate insight go back to generating the next insights. And the way you do that is down at the bottom, and that is through automated value delivery. What you want to do is, for insights that have high value, you want to make sure that they are automated, and the people who are good at automating things can take care of that while the insight generators go off and make new insights. So whether it's to a dashboard, to a machine learning model, to sort of more raw data formats, you want to automate that delivery, and you do that through or within your data as a service. And so in this framework, there's a variety of data structures. You might have a data lake on the left that's a more raw format, and a data warehouse that's very refined on the right. But you may have data structures in the middle that balance that sort of how easy is it to get data in and how easy is it to get data out. And so, automating to the right degree, rather than necessarily putting everything in the warehouse, which takes a lot of work, there might be insights where we're going to automate it to a lesser degree, because the people who are using it don't need, the level of development that goes into a warehouse. So that's the overall concept that we're talking about today. And in particular, we're talking about the people who generate the insights, your knowledge workers. So this is a set of categories we use to profile an organization's knowledge workers. I'm going to talk about them. Obviously, these are general categories. There are categories that we've found to exist in a lot of organizations. That doesn't mean they exist in all organizations. It doesn't mean there aren't other ways to categorize it that might make more sense for you. But using this as a starting point is a good way just to get a sense of what could be out there, so that if you encounter something different, you sort of know, you can figure out how to change one of these categories or create a new one. So on the left, we have data scientists. And obviously data science is becoming increasingly popular. More organizations have data scientists, and they are distinctive because they really do a lot of new detailed things with data. They use code like R and Python. They use statistical tools like SAS. They'll use machine learning packages like Data Robot. They'll use visualization tools. They'll use sort of whatever they can get their hands on to do the work that they do. And also importantly, they want to see all the data that they can. They want raw data. They want refined data. They want enriched data. They really need a broad variety of data, and they have the skill set to take it and use it, manipulate it, do what they want. The other challenge there, of course, is that they're playing around with large volumes of data, so they have the potential to have a high impact on your analytics framework because they're just doing higher volume work than a lot of other people might do. So data scientists, sort of high skill set, access to a variety of data. Next, we have data engineers who are more focused usually on structured relational database data. They often know SQL very well. They'll know tools, maybe ETL tools or data wrangling tools. They understand the concepts of relational databases, so normalization and creating tables and indexing and those kinds of things. So they may use some of the similar programming languages. They'll often use ETL tools like DataStage or Informatica, and they'll often do a lot of custom SQL scripting, maybe stored procedures, maybe just sort of SQL in a tool like Toad. And so they can really do a lot of work in terms of transforming, modeling, and distributing data for others. These people may be responsible for the data warehouse. They may be elsewhere and just are using their SQL knowledge to generate insights and analytics for units of business. They usually want data that is more refined than a data scientist. They ideally want it to be tabular, and if they're not the ones cleaning up the data, if the data is already cleaned up a bit, it helps them get to their task faster. So then we get to data analysts, and these are really sort of where we start to sort of make the shift from the people who are sort of focused on manipulating the data to people who are focused on producing results. And I guess with data scientists, obviously they're doing both because their goal is to produce models or predictive analytics. But they spend a lot of their time sort of nose deep in the data. A data analyst is someone who's using tools like Tableau, like Excel, like Power BI, and they know how to use those tools. They know how to manipulate data, and they'll gather sources. They may know some SQL. But they are definitely sort of a little more focused on the reporting end of things. They're going to produce a dashboard, they're going to produce a pivot table, and they're doing that to answer a question that someone had. Perhaps they came up with a question, perhaps someone in their organization did, but they are so doing that data manipulation usually with a more specific end in mind. This is also where we sort of start to see, they have, usually strong technical skills, but they're usually more focused on the visualization tool like Tableau or Excel. And often what happens is they use the tools that they know, because they're maybe not aware of or they don't have access to tools that can do the same job in a better way. And so they can often produce things that sort of have a higher automation burden. But these are the people who sort of bridge the gap between I really know how to manipulate data and I really know how to create good visualizations. Next, we have business users. These are people sort of the Cognos power users or the Tableau power users. They know how to make reports and they're good at doing it. So, they're not as deep into manipulating the data, but given that the data is there, they can take it and produce, a good dashboard, a good report, and know how to turn that into sort of, actionable insight. They'll use, BI tools like Tableau, Cognos, Power BI. They will obviously sometimes they'll be good with Excel, Office, PowerPoint to bring dashboards or reports into the format that other people need to consume them more readily. And they are very heavily focused on that end of things. And so, those people the people who take more pre-processed, refined data and get it into the hands of people who can take action with it, are obviously critically important. So they like data that is much more refined. They're often data warehouse users, because they want to have all the business rules have been applied, the calculations have been done, and if they need to do it themselves, they're often doing it in the reporting layer, which means that they might come up with a great calculation, but no one else ever sees it because it's in one report. And then lastly, we have consumers. These are people who consume the visualization products that these other people have produced, often the business users. They'll run reports, they'll analyze them, and then they'll take action from there. And so they're really, they are users of the reporting tools, but really from a consumption standpoint, not as much from a creation standpoint. And so, their technical skills are not necessarily high, or they're not necessarily being used. They're really more focused on, okay, give me the data, give me the analysis so that I can go make a decision. And obviously, that's critical, because without making those decisions and taking those actions, you're not going to realize any value. So this is sort of a high-level categorization, like I said, of the people that you have in your organization. So what's important is to understand, which of these categories you have and in what proportion. So what we often see is, there's few people on the left and there's more people on the right. Now, this is not necessarily true for every organization, especially small organizations. There may be very few consumers because everyone, is familiar with data and is at least capable of creating dashboards and reports. There may be places that don't yet have data scientists. There may be places where sort of this data analyst, business user level, there's fewer of those people, and the company really relies on data engineers to do a lot of that work. So understanding, what your distribution looks like, and if you have, some gaps or some, sort of different distribution, that is going to affect your analytics framework, because these different groups of people want different types of data structures and data zones. And so, if you are a data scientist heavy organization, a data lake becomes very, very important. If you are very business user connected, then a data warehouse becomes very important. So that's why, looking at these categories and looking within your organization to find what you've got is so important. So last week we talked about the difference between old data ingestion model and the new data ingestion model in a modern analytics framework. And so I'm just going to one of the slides from last week, just to point out that one of the things we discussed was that when you use a modern analytics framework, you're doing less automation because you're only automating as you need to, which leads to less development work. But you have more moving parts, and that means there's more management work. And one of the reasons for that is because when you are, sort of discovering and enabling all of your knowledge workers, you are creating, additional data structures. And so the same piece of data is going to exist in multiple different places. Each of those knowledge workers may be doing their own thing with the data. They may be wrangling it. They may be writing code against it. They may be creating a sandbox to create new data structures. And so that means that governance is more necessary. And so as you, enable and empower them, you also want to make sure that things are being managed. So we're going to talk a little about what that management can look like and how to do it in a way that is more likely to be successful. So governance, these are sort of the I guess areas or pillars of governance that are required for a successful governance project. And I know this looks like a lot, and we're going to talk about how to make that manageable in a couple slides. So you have everything from structure, which is sort of the high-level organization of what your governance model is, what groups you have, and how you manage it. And we see that as sort of being represented at three levels. You have the executive strategic level, which sort of says this is what we're doing with governance and this is how it's important. It ensures stakeholder buy-in. It assures that this is a business plus IT endeavor. Once you have a strategic direction, you're going to set some policies, and that is something where you want representatives from all the different areas of the organization. And then you have more of a tactical structure. So there's going to be detailed things that need to get done. What happens if there's a data quality issue? Who do people go ask about what this data means? Who do we talk to when there's a new data source? So you're going to have these sort of smaller structures that keep the day-to-day aspects of governance running. So that middle level policy is going to create a set of guardrails to make sure that the people in the process stay on track. Things like, how do we establish data ownership? How do we classify data? Are there security and compliance needs? And so just sort of set the overall rules so that everyone sort of is going in the same direction. So you set up those sort of high level things, and that enables the three on the right, which are people, process, and technology. These are all equally important. So having people with defined and communicated responsibilities is super important, because it's easy to say everyone should do governance, but there's a lot of tasks to be done, and it's important that people know, okay, well, part of my job is to be a data steward, and that means, answering questions about what this data means, and coming up with definitions for new data sources, and addressing data quality issues, those sorts of things. Those things that they're doing are their processes. So you want to have processes that are aligned to what their function is, what the subject area that they're governing is, and so anything that they need to do, there should be an understood process, and ideally that is a written down process, but sometimes it's a little more informal depending on what governance structure works for you. And then lastly, we have tools, we put this last for a reason, because it's easy to think, oh, I'm going to go buy a tool, I'm going to go buy a data catalog tool, and that will solve my problem. And the tool can be a component of the solution, but it is not the solution in and of itself. Without the right people, without the right processes, the tool will not get implemented in the right way, or configured in the right way, or it won't be adopted. And so really making sure that you have the right processes and people to support it are together more critical than having the perfect tool. That being said, of course, like in many areas, tools are enablers and are ways to vastly make people more efficient and improve the work that they do. So we want to make sure that you find the right places to use the right tools. And so governance also encompasses lots of different domains. So within sort of data and analytic governance, these are the high level areas that we usually point people at. And the important thing to consider is that you don't need to govern in all of these areas. If you're doing a modern analytics framework, some of them like data quality and I guess sort of data stewardship are both probably the most important ones, just being able to understand, here's the data I have, and let's ensure that it is of high quality. But other things are going to vary depending on what the needs of your organization are. And so which ones of these that you want to use will change a lot based on your organization. And so we'll talk about this in a couple slides, but when you are adopting governance, the approach should not be, we're going to do all of these things. It should be, we're going to pick the things that we need to do and focus on them. And so, and that's through a system that we call lean governance. So, in addition to being careful about which areas you govern, thinking about how much you govern based on, how much data is being used can save a lot of effort and really make sure things are sort of tightly focused on areas of importance. So this is a deliverable that we've used for clients in the past, and it sort of proposes a set of sort of degrees of governance based on how data is being used. And so on the left, if we think about data awareness, where data is sort of just being looked at for the first time, maybe it's just been pulled from a source system, it hasn't even gotten into the data lake yet, just a couple people are looking at it, it's in the data catalog because you're cataloging your source systems, but only in an automated fashion. So really right now, there hasn't been much governance work other than setting up an automated data catalog. But then if we notice that people are asking for access, if we notice that people are looking at it in the catalog, then we move it to the next column of exploration. And so then, a data steward says, okay, people are interested in this, so let's go write up some documentation. Let's make sure it's in the data lake. Let's copy the tables across every night so people have access to it. And then now that it's in the data lake, it's got broader access. Data scientists can get at it. People can take a look at it and decide what they want to do. And so as the degree of request for access goes up, we might move it into the prototype stage. Now we're setting some standards on it. We're setting security. We might be moving it into a different data zone out of the data lake into a cleansed zone. Maybe we're even structuring it or integrating it with similar data. And we're creating different views so that not only the data scientists, but other types of data engineers, business analysts can now start to look at it. And then over time, it may move to even more detailed models. So line of business and enterprise are really where it sort of goes into the warehouse and possibly even goes into master data management. So we're saying this is highly valuable data. We're going to take it. We're going to put it in facts and dimensions. We're going to, create a whole master data management process because of its criticality. And so, moving from the left to the right, there's a set of triggers, there's a set of reviews, there's a set of processes that make sure that this fuller, more involved governance effort only gets applied once the value of the data has been proven. So that kind of setup, so we're enabling the early knowledge workers like data scientists, early access to the data, and then using its existence in the catalog, their use of it and their interest in it to sort of drive moving it up the line to more detailed data zones. So this is where we think about how to focus level of effort. So if you're thinking about doing governance, often people will get intimidated because they will say, well, there's so many areas of governance, I got to do it all. That's just a lot of work. And our point of view is that governance is much more likely to be successful if it is incremental and if it is focused on value. And so these are sort of the high-level dimensions that you can use to sort of drive level of effort. So obviously, what domains you decide to cover, maybe product, maybe customer, maybe other things, how much data there is, and do you need to cover all the data? We have a client where they said, okay, we're going to govern this domain, and we looked at it, and we realized that only really 5% of their data was causing all of the data quality issues. And so by saying we're going to govern this 5%, we made the level of effort, significantly lower. Less data had to be reviewed. There's just less volume in terms of running MDM processes. And so they just saved a tremendous amount of time and really didn't lose any value because that was the 5% where all of the data quality issues were. So choosing governance areas. So, we've been at places where they said, no, actually our data quality is good because it's critical to our business and sort of the data entry people keep an eye on it. So we don't have to worry about data quality. So great, then there's no reason to create a big governance program around data quality because you're not going to get much value out of it. So understanding that you don't have to do all those governance areas, and in fact, what you should do is investigate which ones provide business value and governing those areas only. And then within each area, do you need to create the structure, the people, the processes, the tools? Sometimes it's better to say, hey, let's focus on sort of people and process. We have a structure in place. Let's just get the right people doing the right things, and then we'll figure out the tool we need. Or maybe you have the people, but you need a tool. So you may or may not need all three of those things, and you may not all need them at the same time. And so by choosing those areas, you will make your governance more incremental, which means much more likely to be successful. So here's an example of a data lake architecture which sort of shows that focus. So in this case, this is an organization that has a high volume of ingestion into their data lake. And so they really want to focus on making sure everything's cataloged, without requiring too much manual effort. And then also making sure that they understand the sources of the data when it goes downstream to the data lake and to the data warehouse. So in this case, data is being ingested they have a policy that basically, as new sources come online, there's a team that creates data ingestion into the data lake. And when they do that, the data lake is automatically adding to the data catalog basic information on the data coming in. And so that data catalog is made available both by UI and API, so it can be searched programmatically. Because of the high volume of data, they want to make sure that people who want to have access to it in a more systematic fashion can. And then over time, the data lake will have access policies. It's encrypted because they're concerned about their data. But as people find use for that data, it gets transformed in using a variety of tools into analytics. and so that it can show up in warehouses, data marts, and other data structures. And often this is going to be federated, so there may be multiple data structures being used by multiple parts of the organization. And as that happens, there is a governance policy to examine the catalog metadata, make sure that the access policies are appropriate, and establish data lineage. So, basically, once things leave the data lake, the manual process kicks in and makes sure that the data is being used in the appropriate way. And so there is the data lineage policy has some automation to it, but is largely sort of it gets triggered manually and creates the understanding of, okay, I'm using this data in the warehouse. Where did that come from in the warehouse? Where did that come from in the data lake? And then eventually, where did that come from in the source system? There are aspects in here, there's not a lot of concern about data quality in this model because they're assuming their source system is good and they haven't had a lot of issues with it. So they have chosen to focus on the areas that are important to them. So to summarize, you want to understand how insight generation works so you can optimize it. You want to understand what types of knowledge workers are using your data. Managing them and their data requires governance. And governance requires structure, people, process, and tools. And you want to target your governance at topics of value to ensure that it is successful. I apologize for going a little bit longer than I expected. I think we only have time for 1 or 2 questions, but I will take them now.
Thanks, Jeff. We do have a couple questions, and I'm going to try to sort of bundle them together in essence for time. So one is, one organization says, we have a governance team. How do I best work with them? And then there was another 2 questions that said, how do I justify the expense of governance, and do I need all the different types of governance?
So you want to, I guess the answer to all 3 is you want to focus on business value. So you certainly don't need all types of governance unless they're all of value to you. You want to use that value to justify governance. You shouldn't be doing governance for its own sake. You should be doing it because it gets you something. And that something may be we improve our data quality, and that means we increase our revenue. It may mean that it gets us compliance, so we pass audits. It can mean a number of different things. But by making that case, you're going to hopefully justify the program, but also means that people involved in it understand why you're doing it. One of the risks of governance is it's just seen as people imposing rules for their own sake, and you want to communicate that no, we're doing this for the good of the organization, and here's how you can help. So if you have a governance program in place, hopefully, if they're addressing the areas that you're concerned about, then you can go talk to their sort of high-level executive committee or their policy committee and see if maybe if the policies are appropriate, or if there are changes that can make sure that you're seeing the value that you need to see. And if not, you can say, hey, here's a new area, here's why it's important to the organization. Can we create a new tactical committee or add a new policy to enable that? So it's definitely something where you want to, you can leverage the existing work. You don't want to create a parallel governance board. You want to make sure that it is coordinated and enabled.
Great. You sort of bundled all 3 answers in. That's terrific. And right. I think we are out of time.
We are out of time. So let me just quickly show we've got a series of topics coming up on Thursday, including Cognizant AWS this week. And next week, like I said, we'll be talking about insight generation. And then we'll be wrapping up this series and going on to the next set. So thanks, everyone, and hope you have a good rest of your day.